So the question today is, what is faith and why should I trust it? We talk a lot about faith, but we don't necessarily define our terms every time we do. And before we get there, I just want to say that the word religion, to you, is it a positive word or is it a negative word or a bit of both? I think to our society, it's become a bit of a dirty word, the word religion. Oh, you're religious, aren't you? But if you read, say, books or news articles or whatever from like a century ago, it was considered a good thing if you were religious, almost something that people would be like, oh, I wish I were as religious as you. Oh, you're a good person, you're so religious. The Bible has a verse that gives the sense of the word as it used to be understood. Not with negative connotations, but positive. James 1:27 says, religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction and to keep oneself unstained from the world. And the definition is of something ultimately good, to be attained, something that we should strive for rather than something that we should avoid. Yet the word today has lost a lot of its inherent positive meaning. Religion is now defined as a pursuit or interest followed with great devotion. And I think that's a pretty good definition. See, the word comes from the old Latin word religare, which means to bind, as an obligation, bond, or reverence. And today, that definition there, to bind, sounds very negative. It sounds like your freedom is being taken away, that you are being bound, like thrown in jail and the key locked away, or something like that. The word religion can also be defined as belief in and worship of a superhuman power or powers, especially a god or gods. And to me, that sounds almost like a Marvel movie or something, like something that's make-believe rather than something that's real. So, people can worship these superhuman gods if they want to, but it makes it sound kind of otherworldly and impractical, like it's not founded in reality, especially relegated to extracurricular activity, if you will, in our secular society. So the word religion, then, is not seen so much as being devoted to a set of beliefs that give one grounding in this world to something bigger than them as an individual, with the goal of being a good person, as in the verse we just read from James. But it's seen, by contrast, as something that's more like personal choice to have belief in something that isn't grounded in reality, like an array of options that are out there, that are based on personal preference and have no guarantee of being, in any sense, real or factual. So, as you can see, a word like religion, its meaning and its connotations can change over time. It's gone from something that's positive to be attained to something that's kind of shameful to be scorned. The word itself hasn't changed, but society's interpretation of it has. Another example, if we can just take a little bit of a tangent for a moment, would be the word awful. Has it got positive or negative connotations? Originally, it was more positive than it is today. It used to mean something worthy of awe, something with like the 7 wonders of the world. You'd say, wow, I'm in awe of that, how awful it is. But now it would sound like it's terrible, it's awful, it's to be avoided. Or the word gay, which I've just been reading some old classic books, and they use the word gay a lot to have positive meaning, to talk about something that's brightly coloured or happy, someone's mood. But imagine if a person today emerged from that time. Let's say they were frozen solid and they somehow were able to be brought back to life now, and they hadn't aged a day and 100 years had passed. And imagine they looked around them, they walked out in the world for a day, and they discovered all of these amazing technological advances that we have now. And then someone came and saw them and said, why is your mouth wide open? Why are you so speechless? To which they might get themselves in trouble if their reply was along the lines of feeling awfully gay about what they'd seen. So words can change over time and their meaning can change. Another word that has changed a lot over the years is the word faith. Today it's used is kind of synonymous with religion. Like, I belong to a faith, or I belong to a religion. For instance, you could belong to the Hindu faith or the Muslim faith. But back in the day, our society had only one religion or faith. We kind of had a limited culture. We didn't have a lot of experience of different parts of the world or different beliefs, all that kind of stuff. So these words had meaning within a particular narrow worldview. And so instead of talking about different faiths, it was kind of like, we have a collective faith, being the Christian faith or at least a theistic faith, and we have like slightly different beliefs about it, but it's all within that. So, for instance, you may be aware of the First Amendment in the US Constitution, which says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and so on and so forth, legal speak, stuff that's hard to understand. But back then, wasn't the presumption that the freedom of religion essentially meant freedom from judgment by other denominations, right? It wasn't necessarily freedom of different religions. The US, wasn't it just trying to escape the rigid class system that they'd had in England that they were trying to run away from, and they wanted to have a freedom from that so that people could be valued for their worth by what they'd done and who they were rather than what they were born into. You see, England had a bit of a class system, a caste system, and they'd established the Anglican Church, not because they necessarily felt it was more pious or anything. There's a whole lot of reasons behind it, which we won't get into, but essentially they were divorced themselves from the Catholic Church, made their own sort of church similar to that, the Anglican Church. But that's a story for another day. But suffice to say, in the US, they didn't want one denomination to be seen as superior and other ones to be persecuted, or vice versa. And it was written into their constitution to protect minority beliefs within the overarching Christian or theistic worldview, which they saw as religion, as opposed to religions. Does that make sense? Today, there's kind of a different interpretation when you hear things like freedom of religion. It's more like freedom to have whatever religion you like, rather than freedom of religion within that. And the word faith, too, has changed a lot. So today we're going to be discussing 4 different aspects to faith as we seek to understand what faith really is and what it should be and how to apply it to our lives. So firstly, there's the relationship between faith and reason. All right, there's a relationship between those. Around 400 AD, so about 1600 years ago, St. Augustine of Hippo, and that's the place in Roman North Africa, not the animal, said that the faith was the door to reason. So he saw the relationship between faith and reason. Faith was the door, or the way to access reason. He's often quoted, "I believe in order to understand, and I understand the better to believe." I believe in order to understand, and I understand the better to believe. So what does this mean? For Augustine, some 1600 years ago, there was no conflict between faith and reason. They had a relationship. They weren't two completely separate parts of completely different ways of living. Today, many people, especially in our secular world, think of faith as something like a personal preference, something that you can choose for yourself whether it's true or not. Therefore, it's quite separate altogether from reason. It doesn't have to be grounded in reality, like believing in the Tooth Fairy or Spider-Man or Santa Claus. Jesus was a real person, but our beliefs about him border on more the mythical, super beliefs rather than reality, things like this. But to Augustine, some 1600 years ago, faith and reason were both required for understanding to take place. Now, you might be like him and you think that that's obvious. Faith is important, reason is important. I can see how those two work together. And perhaps at the time it was obvious to everybody. But in a few moments we'll look at the contrary position to this and understand how there is a different way now of looking at the relationship between faith and reason. One that underlies our culture's worldview and deeply affects our ability, or inability to accurately understand the world and our place within it. So let's jump forward nearly 1,000 years from 400 AD to the 13th century. There was a man named Thomas Aquinas who argued that faith and reason, though they have a relationship, should be, in a way, kept separate, or at least our understanding of them was separate. He was a Christian, so why did he say this? You see, while he agreed with Augustine that all truth is God's truth, so if something is true, it's God's truth, because it's true, and God made everything, so there can't be a discrepancy between truth and God's truth. And he believed that faith and reason, therefore, couldn't conflict with each other, because anything that was God's truth was truth, so anything that was faith was also reason and vice versa. But he understood them as having different roles within our understanding. And he saw faith as being provided by revelation. So, provided by your interaction with God and things that are revealed to you. That's what faith is. As opposed to reason, which was knowledge gained through our senses and through the way that we interact with this world, like our sight and our hearing and our touch and thinking about those things. So this was quite a helpful definition, taking it a little bit further than Augustine and unpacking a little bit more of our understanding of how we know, especially for some 750 years ago, I think it was, roughly. But the law of unintended consequences points out that even though you might have an understanding of something, sometimes the consequences of what you've said will have unintended consequences. And what you meant for it to produce, the opposite might end up coming to pass. So within his worldview, he could totally understand or explain how these two things that appeared to be contrary worked together because of that presupposition that all truth is God's truth. Therefore, faith and reason had no conflict with each other. But if you take yourself completely out of that worldview into a worldview that says, anything to do with God and is kind of make-believe, but anything that is to do with our senses is really true, then you can see how division could emerge between faith and reason, and how his definition could be taken the wrong way and have unintended consequences that would undermine then the worldview. Have I still got you? Okay, cool. Instead of seeing faith and reason as bedfellows, they kind of became competitors, and the world has never been the same since. So firstly, faith and reason, the relationship between them, they were both seen as having a relationship then. But secondly, we look at faith and doubt. So in steps the infamous René Descartes, a French philosopher. Now, whenever you see these two descriptors, French or philosopher, together, especially a French male philosopher with a woman's name, be very wary. Or at least, for me personally, I'm very wary. Maybe it's because I have English ancestry, or because of my allegiance to the All Blacks and how anytime we kind of turn a blind eye to the French, they end up punishing us. But I'm always a little bit wary of them. Like, I've learned to appreciate them, and when I come to meet an individual French person, I don't judge them because they're French, and sometimes they're actually really nice. But especially their politics or their philosophies, sometimes I'm a little bit standoffish about it. So I think it's something we should never forget was the French Revolution. And I've heard a lot of people talk about the French Revolution, and I was like, oh yeah, yes, the French Revolution. And then I'm thinking, what the heck is that? I did a whole lot of research into it about a year or two ago and learned, and it should be a warning to us, what happened in the French Revolution, never to become so convinced that other people are the problem with our society, to the point that we forget that we are all, to some extent, the problem. We all have a nature that needs redeeming. If you've ever read George Orwell's Animal Farm, who's read that? It's not that long, it's quite interesting. We need to be aware that when a group of bad guys, or people we see as the bad guys, who have all the power, who seem to be making it hard for everyone else in society, whenever they're overthrown, what simply happens, spoiler alert to the book, but it's been around for decades, another will simply rise up to take their place and become the bad guys. Anyway, back to René Descartes. this French philosopher. His goal in life was to find a starting point for reason. He said, okay, we can argue about faith, we can argue about reason, but really what's the starting point? Because unless we have the right starting point, all presuppositions have the potential to be wrong. And because all of society basically at the time was Christian or considered Christian, again, things like the word religion, it was a positive thing. So you wanted to be a Christian rather than wanting to not be a Christian, whether you were actually any different depended on the culture at the time. But his work had unintended consequences, which seems to happen with these people who philosophize about something. Whereas Christians believe, there's that word again, we believe in God as our starting point, meaning that, therefore, faith in God precedes our reason, like Augustine. Descartes gave us another option, one that has changed the Western world and perhaps forever. Thomas Aquinas' theory of reason was for Descartes not enough of an explanation. So Descartes sought to really get to the bottom of what reason is. Don't want to just argue about these. I want to actually find out the starting point. And he argued against Thomas Aquinas, or anybody who had the same kind of thinking as him, that we can't fully trust our senses. Who here has ever been let down by their sight, their sense of smell, their hearing, their touch, or their taste? Yeah? I remember once, it's good to have my dad in the room, so I can't be dishonest about my personality or the way that I was as a child. But I remember once someone was giving a speech or something. As part of their speech, they were talking about the difference between Coca-Cola and Pepsi. And I remember thinking, well, Pepsi sucks and Coca-Cola is really good. So I'll get up and I'll be their test dummy. I got myself blindfolded and I went up the front. And in front of the class, I got to do a blindfolded taste test between the two. And their argument was that either we'd be incorrect or we wouldn't be able to tell the difference or whatever. I had a sip of one, I had a sip of the other one, and I go, undoubtedly the best, Coca-Cola. And then it turned out I was wrong, it was Pepsi. And of course, not wanting to accept that I was wrong, I had to spend a bit of time afterwards reflecting on it. What went wrong? How had I deceived myself? And I realized what it is if you drink a whole glass of Coke, it's much more satisfying than a whole glass of Pepsi. But Pepsi, originally the taste is kind of superior. You know, anyway, stuff like that. That's how my brain works. I was wrong, I understand. But we can be deceived, and we can deceive ourselves. You see, beyond that, you could be delirious or mad, or you could see things that weren't really there, like if you were in the desert and you saw an oasis, a mirage. So seeing, touching, smelling, hearing, and tasting can be doubted. Therefore, to Descartes, our senses and the knowledge through the senses cannot be trusted. There's got to be a starting point before that, something that is more able to be relied upon for the beginning of knowledge. The fact that he could doubt, after he'd gone through all this process and stripped away layer by layer, he came to this conclusion. The fact that he could doubt, concluded Descartes, proved one thing, that he could think. And he said, if he couldn't think, then he might not exist. But because he could think, he couldn't therefore not exist. So if he could think, he could exist. Kind of like Neo in the Matrix. If it turned out that everything he thought was real turned out to be an illusion, one could never argue against the fact that because he could think, he existed. Thus the famous phrase was born, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. You didn't think you were going to get so much philosophy this morning, did you? So what have we learned so far? 1600 years ago, faith and reason were friends. Faith was the starting point for all understanding. 750 years ago, faith was by revelation, that is, by God's revealing it to us, while reason was obtained by considering the experiences of our senses. 400 years ago, the starting point was no longer faith or something out there, something bigger than ourselves, but doubt. The starting point was myself. I think, therefore I am. The starting point is me and my own rational genesis. And today we call it this idea that knowledge is gained by doubt. We call it Cartesian doubt. Cartesian, named after Descartes. So why does this matter? What's this got to do with faith? What's this got to do with the Bible? What's this got to do with how we live our lives? Well, let's say somebody came to you and said, Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Let's say this was the first time you'd ever heard this. You might say, well, I don't believe that. Anybody who does is gullible. Why? Because our entire methodology for understanding in the West today, based on that starting point from Descartes, starts with doubt. We say, okay, you've said something, but I'm just going to be skeptical of that. We ask not, why should we believe this, but why shouldn't I believe that? Why shouldn't I doubt that statement? And that's how science is understood to work. We break down all false statements, or all statements that we hypothesize, and we try to find out whether they're actually false or not, until only the ones that we consider therefore to be factual remain. The problem with this is that we ignore the fact that all science stands upon prior understanding. There are things that we haven't actually tested for ourselves, things that we presume to be fact, or to have been determined as fact a long time ago. We don't philosophize about every little thing, like whether 1 + 1 = 2, or some people philosophize about that, and we're not going to go down that rabbit hole today. So we break down all false statements until only the ones that appear factual remain. And the problem with this is that we ignore that all science stands upon prior understanding. So if you take the statement I just gave and consider it a random thought, this, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, with no background to it, then it's very easy to doubt it, right? But there's another way to look at it. So thirdly, faith and faithfulness. The entire scientific community relies upon the witness of its own community and those who have gone before them. True statement? In science, there are very few facts. There are rather theories. Take Darwinism, for instance. Evolution is not a fact, it is a theory. Now, it may be the best theory we've got, scientifically speaking, but it is constantly subject to rigorous scientific scrutiny. The more of this it undergoes, the more we can rely upon it as being like a fact. But true scientific method would never, ever allow something that is only a theory to be a fact. We can treat it like a fact, but hasn't moved from theory to fact. Science deals with theories. And it's the same with things like gravity, right? We can rely upon it as if it's a fact. We can believe in it strongly enough that we rely upon it, but we would never consider the case completely closed. Gravity is now a fact rather than a theory. There's always more to learn about gravity. For instance, an apple may have fallen upon the head of Isaac Newton while sitting on the grass here on Earth, but how would that apple have behaved in space? Would it have behaved the same way or differently? Would it have gone into an orbit around him? Or beyond this, how would it behave when it was approaching a black hole? So the case is never completely closed. There's always more to learn. Science never sleeps. Okay? It does, however, rely upon a consensus of theory. Tried and true. As close to facts for us as they could be, so much so that we can actually stand upon them and live our lives and not just test by doubt everything we do. Like, today, is the floor going to behave the same as yesterday? Can I walk upon it? Is gravity going to be the same, or are there factors I haven't considered? You just got to get on with your life, and you've got to think of some things as fact, enough to live upon anyway. It's similar when it comes to a statement such as, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If this statement had never before in the history of humanity and the universe been uttered, and it came from the mind of a person, we would have a lot of questions to ask of it, such as, okay, that's random, I've never heard that before. What makes you think that in the beginning, God, whoever that is, created the heavens and the earth? Who told you this? Based on what evidence should we believe your idea? And eventually we would either disprove it, probably quite easily, or we would consider it to have some weight and continue to scrutinize it until it became accepted, like in science, as almost a fact, enough to live our lives upon it. But there's another way to look at it. It's not so much through reason or doubt, but through faith and revelation. And I think this is what Thomas Aquinas was getting at. Christians believe that this statement was revealed to Moses. He didn't come to know it through the observation of his senses and his thinking about that, but it was revealed to him by God through relationship. Moses, the author of the first 5 books of the Bible. And it was not so much this discovery of scientific theory, it was a revelation of truth from the mind of God, given through a man, God's mediator, Moses, so that all people could know the truth and that the truth would in turn set us free. Now we could say to all of these things, hogwash, I don't believe in God, I don't believe that Moses wrote the Pentateuch or the Torah, I certainly don't believe that a make-believe God made the world. In fact, I believe there's no heaven, the earth is younger than the universe, and it all came from a Big Bang millions of years ago. Therefore, if Christians believe this nonsense, I want nothing to do with Christians or the Bible, I'm out of here. Actually, that seems pretty reasonable, right, that argument there? So I'm out of here, see ya. But then why do Christians such as myself believe in something so apparently absurd as in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth? Entrusting the foundation of our lives to a dead man who allegedly lived 3,500 years ago and performed such awful miracles as parting the sea, walking through on dry land, hitting a rock, having water flow from it, infesting Egypt with frogs and gnats and giant hailstorms, picking up a snake and turning into a stick, talking with a bush that burned but was never consumed, among other things, right? It really does seem absurd after all. So see ya, I'm out of here. But I believe also in another couple of verses in the Bible, written a little bit sooner, in a slightly different context, approximately 2,000 years ago. Its validity is more to be believed because it survives rigorous scrutiny, more so even than contemporaneous accounts of people like Caesar, Cleopatra, Cicero, and the like. It's found in Hebrews 12, 1-2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. It begins with therefore, and it refers to a cloud of witnesses from the previous chapter, Hebrews chapter 11. People such as Moses, but also Gideon, David, and others. It infers that witnesses of God's active role in humanity surrounded the person who wrote those verses at the time, and by extension, us today. We are surrounded by a cloud of witnesses. There are witnesses somewhat analogous to the community of scientists who are witnesses to their way of thinking about theories. People whose witness we can rely upon because it was tested. People who have experienced God by revelation, who have brought to life the words of the Bible, who have claimed in their own lives and lived upon it, and it's been tested as a firm foundation for them to live their lives upon, who we therefore, looking at that cloud of witnesses, believe the same for ourselves. And I love what Dr. Darrell Bock said just a couple of months ago when he came and visited our service and shared with us. To try to convince someone that something is true because it's in the Bible simply won't convince many people. If you say, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, it's in the Bible, therefore I believe it, therefore you should too, they'll say, really? But we'll be able to gain some consideration with statements like this. Well, I believe it was put into the Bible because it's true. Notice the difference? I don't believe it solely because it's in the Bible, but because it's true, and therefore found in the Bible, because so many things I've found in the Bible in my life also to happen to have been proven true through experience and revelation, and because I never have been let down by anything in the Bible, therefore I feel confident enough to believe that all things in the Bible must be true, whether I've experienced them yet or not. And just as the scientific community bestows the description of almost as good as a fact upon its theories, we can do the same for the Bible. Does that make sense? Of course, if our understanding of these facts changes, so will our interpretation. It's okay for us to change our interpretation of things over time. For instance, at one time, all believed, Christian or not, that the world was flat, or that there were ends of the earth. You'll see those words still imprinted in the Bible. Our understanding of these facts and these things has grown, And so therefore, when we read the Bible, we read those a little bit differently from what people might have done a couple of thousand years ago. But never have these new theories or facts undermined the purpose or the reliability of the Bible, especially as a solid foundation for our lives. So the relationship between faith and faithfulness is this. I have faith, not because I have within me a superior ability to muster up belief in the unlikely, but because, although I have only access to a mustard seed-sized amount, the one in whom I place my faith is by contrast infinitely faithful. And as such, I will always choose to have faith in God. I trust that you're still with me. Sorry, this has gone a bit longer than I typically do for a Sunday morning sermon. So let's take a short breather before our final point. We've discussed faith and reason, faith and doubt, faith and faithfulness. I know some of you are thinking this is long, but others are thinking, wow, this is good. I am anyway. Fourthly, faith and sight, as we approach the end of our message this morning. Hebrews 11:1, to which we just referred. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, like what you were talking about, Carlos. Faith is the assurance of the things I hope for. So when we feel hopeless, we can look at the Word and we know that there's something that is assured to which we can pin our hope to get through the tough times now. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. I love those words in that old hymn, as I mention quite often. It is well with my soul. And Lord, haste the day when my faith shall be sight. And similar words are found in 1 Corinthians 13, 8-10. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. Verse 12. For now we see as in a mirror dimly, but then we shall see face to face. For I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. You see, right now we see as in a mirror dimly. Back in Paul's day, mirrors were quite a lot less shiny and accurate as they are now. Here's a picture of what one may have looked like. There's a beautiful person with a mirror on the wall, and that's what a mirror looked like. And you'd polish them up to make them work, but it wasn't like now. So to look into one was not to see a perfect reflection as we do now. The Apostle Paul is saying that now we see as in a mirror dimly. Our faith is good. It's a firm foundation, yet one day even our most vivid prophecies, tongues, knowledge, they'll all pass away. And they will be revealed in eternity as kind of a part truth. Even though they're good and firm and we can rely on them now, we'll see that we never really saw things accurately or fully. Perfection will replace facts and knowledge and theories and belief. Faith will no longer be required because we'll be face to face with the eternal truth of God in a person. We shall then know fully, even as we are now by him fully known. So we celebrated Father's Day last week. I mean, about 5 minutes over. We acknowledge that none of us have or are perfect fathers. As fathers, we only know in part. When a child comes to us and their sibling has a different version of the events, as I'm sure you experienced many times with we three boys, the parent has to make a judgment based on imperfect information. We get things wrong. If there's one thing we can say about humans is that we are not always right. We need to apologize at times for our humanity and the way that it works itself out in our relationships with others. But there is a Father who sees all, and knows each of us perfectly. He is faithful and therefore worthy to be praised. But also, he can be entrusted with our lives. We have faith then because he is faithful. And we know this because of the experiences we've had in our lives, as well as the reasonableness of our rationality in assessing all statements about him and finding that they are faithful enough to be relied upon. So I stand here today as a witness to the glory and the goodness of God. Now I'm going to require active participation from you in a moment, if you're able to stand. And if you identify with that statement, if you've fallen asleep, I'll read it to you again. I stand here as a witness to the glory and the goodness of God. If you also identify with that statement, please stand too. Hebrews 11 verse 6, and without faith it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. If you probably stood out of peer pressure if this is the case. If you have not experienced what it is to have faith in God but would like to, I want to pray for you now. Everyone stay standing, please, but please close your eyes. Or you may believe it, but you say, I believe, help my unbelief. Let's just pray together. Feel free to repeat after me, whether out loud or in your heart. Father, for you are my Father, my Creator, the one who knows me fully. Please reveal yourself to me. I want to know you, to trust you, and to experience that which you've planned for me. I'm surrounded by some of your witnesses today. People who have lived their lives by faith, trusting you, and have tasted and seen that you are good. Help me to know you and to live for you and to one day come face to face with you in eternal bliss and to experience fully the love that you have for us. Thank you for taking my imperfections and washing me white as snow. I come before you that you would make from me, or continue to make from me, a new creation, one who sees the world anew from this day forward. Amen. If you prayed that prayer, let me know after the service. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to celebrate with you, and I'd love to encourage you on the next steps of your journey. God bless you all.